Okay. All right, so we already have about 13 participants, 14 numbers are coming up. We're going to give it a couple minutes here so that everybody has a minute to get in, and we'll just start in a few minutes.
And then when we get started, I don't know if you're the only one who can press record or.
I've already started recording, so.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Just so I don't forget.
So behave.
So we're live.
All right. Let's see. Perfect. Okay. Yep. Just giving it a few minutes here. All right, 16. We're about halfway. Okay. All right.
Oh, you assume this is here.
Yes. So a good line of people coming in, filing in slowly. Okay. All right. A couple more minutes. Okay, chats are working. Okay, I think we're going to get started here. I think it's probably a good point to get underway. So I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Rima Ziuraitiene. I am the president of JAV Lithuanian-American. And this evening, we'd like to present to you a webinar to discuss first steps in career job search, career advancement in varying fields. We have 6 excellent panelists, as well as my VP, Jonas Howes. Jonas is obviously in Lithuania, where all of us want to be, or so we think anyway.
Obviously not.
Yeah, obviously not, but we wish.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of getting them in the prospectus right now.
Yes. So essentially what we would like to do is we will talk about different ways to do a job search through varying fields of work. We will introduce everyone here shortly. A little bit about JAV LJS. I think some of you might remember that your parents' generation, that was a part of this organization that was meant for the advancement of Lithuanian freedom. So obviously our job has evolved a little bit. While we are still, always for the advancement of Lithuanian freedom, we now lobby for Baltic issues, and we also help with things like finding careers, networking amongst other Lithuanians, and things like that. But tonight I will introduce our panelists. We have Stasys Kuliavas, and then we have Sofija Volertas, Sigita Newsom, Stasys Kuliavas, and Jonas Howes. And without further ado, I will give it to our moderator, Jonas Howes, to take it away.
Ačiū Rima ir ačiū Jums. Aš esu Jonas Howes. I'm the JAV LJS Vice President. I want to thank everyone who's logged on and joined us. Looking forward to a great discussion, and it's just good to see other faces, even if we're on Zoom. But before we get started, everyone is in listen-only mode, but we want you to participate. So please ask questions in the Q&A chat function that you see at the bottom there, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of our hour together. We're also recording this, and we plan to make this video available. So if you have any friends who couldn't join us tonight, feel free to pass along the link once we've posted it. As Rima said, as JAV Lithuanian-American, we want to help out young Lithuanians. That's why we asked some of our friends who have been involved with this organization or other Lithuanian youth organizations to pass on some lessons learned and some best practices for those who are starting their careers. So let's meet our panelists. Austėja, I see you directly to my right on my screen. It's probably different from others, but why don't you go first? Introduce yourself.
Hi, so I'm Stasys Kuliavas. I'm actually just a recent college grad from Illinois Institute of Technology. So I finished biomedical engineering and chemical engineering, and now I'm moving on to start my PhD in biomedical engineering, also at Illinois Institute of Technology, and I work more in the tissue regeneration field. And I think one of the questions was since when have we been involved in Lietuvybė? So I think I've been involved ever since I can remember. I went to Lithuanian school. I was really involved in Lithuanian Scouts, so I would always go to Rako stovykla. And currently I'm part of Lithuanians in Chicago Club, so it's a professional group of Lithuanians in Chicago, so it's pretty nice to be involved in that. And I'm also involved in LT Big Brother, which is a global Lithuanian mentorship program, and also in Mūsų metas dabar. So in that project, I'm really trying to encourage Lithuanians to register and vote abroad. So that's a little bit about me.
All right, Stas, you're up next.
Labas, Stasys. I'm not as smart as Austėja, and I probably need some tissue regeneration, so anytime, I'm always accepting. I'm, I think, the lone Canadian in the group here. I live in Toronto, live and work in Toronto. I'm currently in Wasaga Beach. I work in aviation. I have a few passions in life. I think I can generally categorize them as basketball, airplanes, and Lietuvybė. Growing up, like I think most on the panel, was very involved in all kinds of organizations. Skautai and Stovyklos and Jaunimo Sąjunga was a big part of my younger days, and being on Pirmieji Pasaulio Jaunimo Sąjunga and Pirmininkas there for a little while. And involved in Global Lithuanian Leaders in Lietuva. I'm the vice chair of Šalfas at the moment, and just excited to be part of the group here tonight.
Awesome. All right, Sigita.
Labas, I'm Sigita Newsom. I am from Los Angeles. I am a first grade teacher at the John Thomas Dye School. It's a private independent school. You know, the question of Lietuvybė is almost, I don't even know how to answer it, because Lietuvybė it's kind of just an intrinsic part of, I don't know, of my life and how I function as a human. You know, as Stasys mentioned, my entire childhood and being is and was Lietuvybė. So I, you know, was a Pirmininkė and Skautė, part of Jaunimo Sąjunga. I went to Šeštadieninę mokyklą. I taught there. My mom's the directorė, so I continue to teach and have lots of involvement with our LA bendruomenę. I've taught in many countries around the world, including Lietuva, where I lived for 3 years. But I have to say, one of the I guess highest compliments when I lived in Lietuva, all my local friends said that I was more Lithuanian than they were, which I think is a nod to how you know, how fiercely devoted we are to Lietuvybė here in the States and in Canada and anywhere outside of Lietuva. I'm so grateful for everything that we do and our parents and our grandparents did to preserve our culture. And now I do it as much as I can in my everyday life, in my teaching. I'm currently, for the second summer in a row, teaching at my everyday American school, a class in the summers called Little Lithuanians, where I'm teaching non-Lithuanian children all about Lietuva, and I have, you know, great participation, and the kids love it, and we're dancing and we're singing Žemė kelia žolę, and it is such a treasure that I can impart that on kids that have no connection at all to Lietuvybė. And so I really try to infuse Lietuvybė literally any way that I can into my daily life. And I'm so glad to be here as well.
I guess I'm next. Man vardas Jonas. I am based in New York City. I've been here for the last year or so. I work in retail technology, so I do more of point of sale systems, inventory management, and so on and so forth. And my specific role is I'm an account manager. So what I do is I help work with my clients of the business. So one of the clients that we're working with right now is a brand in Italy. And so I was just in Italy for February, ironically, right before the pandemic hit. Literally, I was about to leave Italy and I heard that Milan got hit hard. And the next day I told my boss, I'm like, I don't know what Trump is gonna pull out this time. So we gotta hop out of here. So we dropped out, we dropped everything. We literally left because we were kind of scared for our lives. And honestly, the pandemic, I guess I don't want to bring it up so much, but it's been a very positive as well as negative impact on my business. Technology in general also has been impacted quite heavily, retail technology as well. So I'd be happy to kind of dive into that and see how business executives are making decisions and how they're bettering their decisions with some of the things that we're doing. Ačiū for having me.
Ačiū Jonai. Sofija.
All right, I think I'm last here. So I'm Sofija Volertas. I'm originally from Florida, St. Petersburg, Florida, and then Durham, North Carolina. So I grew up in areas where there weren't a ton of Lietuviai. It was basically just my cousins. I am now a doctor and I'm an allergist and immunologist here, and I'm in North Carolina at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm finished all that long training of medical school and medical training. I did residency in Chicago at University of Chicago in internal medicine and pediatrics. And then I did my fellowship at University of Michigan in allergy and immunology. And I skipped over that my undergrad was Duke University, so go Duke. And so I'm now here and I'd love to talk to you guys about the medical field, that path, the long path that it takes to get through that. And to answer the question about Lietuva and how much a part of my life that's been, you know, I think a lot of us have all kind of said that it's kind of ingrained in our souls and who we are and how we've been brought up in that way. I think I came from it. My parents, my dad was from Cleveland, my mom's from Chicago, but I grew up in a place where I didn't have a huge community around me. And so actually JAV LJS was one of my first real big ways back into Lietuva as a young professional. I went to Congressas my first year of medical school. Actually, I took that my whole winter break to just go to Argentina and Uruguay and Brazil and met a ton of incredible people there. And that was kind of a really big draw back into Lietuva for me and got me back into a lot of that organized positions through that. And so I have a huge love of JAV LJS and how that brought me into it. And I just am really excited to be here and happy to pass along any help or information or advice that I can give in medicine.
After Sofija, I guess I should answer the prompt that you guys were given too. Professionally, I'm a lawyer. My title is Government Affairs Counsel for the Wireless Infrastructure Association, the trade association, so a group of companies that build our wireless networks. So I have been in this job for about a year, but I interned there previously during law school. So we'll get into that a little bit more about different career paths and how they're never really a straight line. They're always different twists and turns. But we wanted to put together this event because looking for a job is hard, even under the best circumstances. And it's really hard right now. Jonas talked a little bit about coronavirus. It's definitely something that has changed all of our lives. And this year more than ever, high school graduates, college students, and recent college graduates are starting internships or entering the job market with a lot of uncertainty. Personally, I graduated from college in 2009, right into the Great Recession. And it was tough. I was lucky enough to have a job when I graduated. It was only for 9 months, and then I had to find something else to do. A lot of my friends didn't have jobs after graduation, so they moved back in with their parents and tried to find some work during that time. So a lot of our members are in that same situation. And we wanted to get together, as you see this group of people who've been involved with Lithuanian organizations in various different ways, but also from different fields, as you probably heard from everybody introducing themselves. So let's get started with our discussion. One of the first things in taking the step in your career is conducting a job search. There are a lot of different ways to do it, certainly a lot of different ways within our own fields. But Stas, I wanted to see if you could get us going with any sort of tips or any things that you've seen in your job search.
Pick on the Canadian first, huh? I get it. And I apologize if it's dark. I can't go inside. It is so hot inside. So we're going to have to deal with this. And the mosquitoes are coming out now. So even more of a challenge. So job search wise, it's a good question, Jona, and I think I failed to mention that I work in aviation. What I do is I help Fortune 500 companies and ultra high net worth people buy and sell business jets. And before I did that, I was a college basketball coach in the US. And when I transitioned into aviation, it was about a year and a half before that recession started. And so I know what you're talking about, and I appreciate the challenge of that time. And thinking back to that, and today I'm in a position now on the other end where I'm hiring people. And one of the first things that I encourage anybody that's about to enter the industry or are thinking about looking for jobs, well before you even start doing that, I think the most important thing to focus on, and Jona, you and I have spoken about this before, is personal branding. I think it is so important to the way that you present yourself and your personal brand. Like, you have the Nikes, the Lululemons of the world, great, and you can talk about those brands, but branding goes to the person as well. Everything that you say, everything that you do, every way that you interact with people, your passions in life, those are all part of your personal brand, and how you present yourself is so important in the job search. You'd be surprised what employers can find about you out there if, when they look, and it's not an if they look, it's when they look. And that, it brings me to one example. When I was coaching college basketball, we were about to offer a student athlete a 4-year full scholarship that would have amounted to about $120,000 worth of tuition. And the last thing that we did was just a big social media deep dive on this person, and stuff that we found there made us rescind our scholarship offer to them. And so what you do outwardly in the world is so important, and it's not just about your knowledge base or your skill base. It's about you, because companies are looking to hire good people that fit their culture. And they're not hiring you just for your knowledge, because there's 100 other people who know the same thing that you do. It's all about how you fit that culture and what kind of teammate you are at those companies. Do you encourage other people? Do you bring other people up? Do you build them up? Or are you that that cancerous employee that is hard to work with? And so my comment is, start focusing on your personal brand as early as possible. If you're in high school, if you're in college right now, there's no better time to start a LinkedIn profile and start building a base of contacts. Start reaching out to people. And the other thing I'll say is networking is so important. Networking, a lot of people look at as meeting people and figuring out how those people can help you. I think it's actually the complete opposite. It's meeting people and figuring out ways that you can help them. And that in turn, if you go out and when you meet new people, if you are focused on how to help these people, that will come back to you tenfold in the end. And so in the job search, I would say it's so important to focus on personal brand and have good control of your brand and be focused on it and be able to speak about it and your passions. And then start networking as early as possible. And that naturally leads to opportunities.
It's really great. And I think a lot of what you're talking about with personal branding starts with figuring out what your interests are and what your talents are. So Sigita, maybe you can talk a little bit more about how you got into your field and when you kind of realized that you wanted to be a teacher, how you kind of realized that that's what your interests were. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so growing up, I, was your typical vadove, babysitter, that whole thing that I can imagine many of us might, connect with, right? We were good with kids, and everyone kind of told me, since my mom was a teacher, I was good with kids, I was creative, I was going to be a teacher. And because of those comments, I was really resistant to that. And I was borderline pushing against it because people were telling me I would become a teacher. And in fact, in high school, I received an award. I went to an all-girl Catholic high school, and this nun handed me this award that was like Sister Marie Award, excellence, something teaching. And the nun handed me the award, and she whispered in my ear, "Now you better become a teacher." And I thought, oh my gosh, this nun is, threatening me to become a teacher, right? And I went to college. I, couldn't figure out what major I wanted to pick because I was still resisting. I took a bunch of, I did take the education route, took a bunch of linguistics courses, thought that was pretty cool because I'm, we're bilingual. I'm very interested in that. I studied in Italy, so I was able to have this, early childhood education degree, but with an emphasis in Italian studies, which I thought was kind of cool. But I graduated and I still did not want to become a teacher because I was still resistant to it. And I had decided that I wanted to I think that was a Svente year, so we were in Lietuva, and I decided I wanted to stay in Lietuva for a couple of months extra. And when I got to Lietuva, I actually did not, I did have the pressure from my dad, who, my dad is not Lithuanian, so he had more of like this pressure of like, you're gonna have to get a job. And I had this, this desire to live in Lietuva. And so my mom said, you know what, why don't you just kind of stay here for the summer and see if you can find a job? But of course she said that lietuviškai, nes mes tik lietuviškai kalbam. And I did. And, I made a lot of cold phone calls, and I was this close to working at a book publishing company. But I ended up calling a few schools, and I ended up working at the Vilnius International School for 3 years, which I thought it would only be a year. And that actually solidified my calling and my passion to be a teacher. So I kind of gave into the to the resistance, and I thought, that was kind of, I don't know, killing two birds with one stone, right? I was kind of fulfilling this passion of living in Lietuva, and I was actually fulfilling this dream I think I always had inside of me. But I think what I really was looking for, and what I'm finding right now, is if you find a school that has a goal and a mission with which you really align, and you give yourself time, if you give yourself time to really find a school that you align with, then and you're not tricking them, right? You're not tricking them in the interview process and saying, oh, no, I totally love that you're traditional and formal. And then you get to the school and you say, oh, I can't believe that you make your kids tuck in their shirts or whatever. Then you have the freedom, or you have the flexibility to kind of feel comfortable teaching teaching to your talents. So right now I'm in an independent private school. I teach first grade, which, they're little, but I have this really big passion teaching cultural competency. And I know that's a huge topic for 6-year-olds, but I do it, and I do it in a way that is approachable through picture books and through empathy. And I talk about Lietuva, and you really have to be real, you know, kind of like what Stasys was saying. If you kind of create this branding for yourself, if you're really true to yourself, and you're not choosing a school because they, you know, because it, you know somebody there, or you know it looks kind of cool, or you know they pay well, or you really have to go on a search and, you know, consider, you know, if public, private, religious. Are you really truly interested in the mission of the school? Are you there for the right reasons? Does it align with, you know, with your educational philosophy? Consider how you were, you know, the education you went through. Did you like it? Did you not like it? You know, and then, you know, really invest yourself. And then you have to consider you know, you're part of a team educating these kids, right? The parents want the best for their children. You want the best for these children. So it becomes more of a kind of like a cohesive environment that you're joining. It's not just a job. I don't know. I kind of look at my job more of like a responsibility and enjoyment. My job is kind of more than just a place I go from 7 to, I don't know, I kind of sleep there. No, I'm kidding. But anyway, so you have to really align yourself with the mission of the school.
Yeah, certainly in the education field. And thanks for sharing that. You talking about the different courses that you took in college and how those sort of directed you in different ways reminds me when I was in law school. I was in my second year, and I thought that I would be interested in energy law. And so I took an energy regulation course in a windowless room in the library. There were about 20 of us sitting around this table, and our professor would sit up at the front, open up her laptop, and she would be reading from it like a teleprompter. And I would feel the energy getting sucked out of me. So I did not develop much of an interest for that subject, but I saw it when I was looking for job listings, and that's often how we do things in law school. Is there's a job listserv that the university puts out, and I saw that there was one for a trade association that worked on telecom issues, and I thought, well, that could be interesting. So I applied, and my resume got pulled out of the pile because one of the people who was reviewing them went to my law school. So that's another thing, you know, on the job search, is leveraging your own networks, and certainly something that I hope we can get from this, and as we hope to develop this series through JAV LJS, is developing a network of Lietuve, which is already there, but so that way we all get to talk to each other more about what our goals are. Those who are in different industries, maybe we can set up mentorships. But after I got that position, I didn't know anything about telecom law, but they brought me on. I thought, actually, this stuff is kind of interesting. And then I applied for another internship the next semester, which was paid, so that helps. And they hired me for the internship, and then they hired me to stay on full time, and I was there for 4.5 years. But Jonas, you know, is there anything similar in your experience when you were in college, because you're a recent graduate from GW, which is down the street from me here in DC? Were there any courses that you took that helped focus your interests, your career path, or maybe using the GW network to get the job that you have now?
Yeah, so I'm going to be honest, there was no course that I kind of stood out. I think my 3 points that I want to share from my experience is, if you have a passion, I think you're a rarity in the community that you are. I don't think a lot of people have a passion. So if you do, I think you stick to it and you consistently and persist through that. If you do not have a passion, which I think was where I kind of stood, and I didn't really know what I wanted. I did finance, I did business, and my family is business oriented, so I got involved in that through that. But I kept an open mind. And I think a lot of people don't realize that if you stay positive, if you stay open to new opportunities, to new people. I was in DC, so I would go out to the World Bank, to the IMF. I would go to all the museums. Obviously, I was a big avid follower for that. And lastly, my point is, I think it also comes down to patience. I ultimately took a job that underpaid me and underappreciated me to a lot of extent. I got involved with some bad people in some cases, and ultimately just that open-mindedness, that perception that there's something down the road that will help me and kind of be something that I want to fit in with, was kind of what pushed me through. So I think I was like a lot of other people where they're kind of unsure as to what they're doing. And like I said, if you do have a passion, I think you have to push forward on it constantly and keep that open mind, as well as make sure you have patience. Good things come with time. And unfortunately, I didn't have any classes I took. If I would suggest something, I would say take as many random courses as you can possibly take. That will help you keep an open mind, that will help you get some exposure into a variety of different fields that you may not have been interested in. Like I got involved in political science and I fell in love with that. And I didn't pursue anything like that, but I've learned about kind of the different parties, how they work and how the government works in itself.
So I can build up a little bit on that. So when I started college, I knew that I wanted to do biomedical engineering, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with it because there's so many different organs in our body and there's just a very broad field. So it kind of made me worried because how do I not know what I want to do with the rest of my life? But I guess I kind of stayed positive. Okay, I was like, I can't worry about that. I might as well just try many different things and figure out what I don't like. So I think it's really important that if you don't know what you want to do, just go out there and figure out really what you don't want to do for the rest of your life. So I definitely volunteered at a lot of different research labs at my university. I did a bunch of internships every summer. I kept reaching out to different alumni to help me get into different companies. So by doing that, I really learned that I don't want to be doing the same thing every day. And in the end, that by just trying new things and exploring, I was able to figure out what I want to do. So really remember that everything does take time. Like you won't figure out in an instant. So it'll be okay in the end.
Yeah, that's really key, staying patient, because it's hard to look for a job. Looking for a job is a job in itself. And, often you'll have interviews that sometimes they don't work out, or you'll send out tens of resumes and cover letters and you'll hear nothing back. But I think that's really important. Both of you just said to stay positive, don't be discouraged. Let's turn to Sofia, because your field is a little unique. What's the job search like in the medical field?
Well, the job search is quite different. I was just telling this crew a little bit earlier, I just did my first real, big girl job search this past year after like an additional 10 more years of training. And so I think going back to where I think the majority of people here are at is, looking at college, when you're finishing up college, trying to decide if you want to go into medicine. I think the big thing I will say is that what kind of echoing what everyone else is saying, have an open mind. People think of medicine as this straight, direct path. You just do one thing after another. But my undergrad degree was actually in medieval Renaissance history, and I minored in classical history. And so I just took I think when Jonas said like, just, take as many random classes as you can. That is exactly what I did. Like I had my pre-med classes lined up, but I took as many random classes as I could and ended up with a major in medieval Renaissance history. And that just got me really excited and kind of kept me invested in learning and the curiosity of that. And that's what got me through an additional more 10 years of being in school, really, was the fact that I just got really excited about learning. And so I think for me that worked, but I also want to say that, medicine, which is traditionally thought of as a very prescribed path and exactly you have to take all these classes and it doesn't leave room for anything else, I would counter that and say that if you are interested in medicine too, whether you've kind of done that whole path already and are looking at medical schools, or if you are thinking about it but feel like it's too late, one, it's never too late. But two, all those additional experiences add to your story of you as a person and kind of, as Stasys said, to your brand and finding your own passions. And that all fits together because your ultimate job is it should be, or at least for me, it's something that I love, right? And so I enjoy being there. And so all these different pieces that fed me to where I am exactly were because I kept following all my passions or all the different exciting things that kind of came up. And when you're going to the point of actual searching for the next medical school, your next step, which is actually just medical school, it's a little bit easier for medicine because there's very specific things. There's only 150 medical schools in the States, right? So that's like 2 or 3 a state. So you could do it geographically. You could just do it to the best school that you get into, because that helps set you up for the next things down the line. That's fair too. I think, medical school is so competitive these days that you really want to be distinguishing yourself differently by presenting yourself in those interviews and in those things when you're going through all this process as really having a passion or another excitement about what you're doing. And that's kind of the best way to go down that route.
Yeah, that's great. And Sofia, in your field, after you've applied to med school, there are tons of rounds of interviews, and we've touched a little bit on, once you've completed your job search, or actually it keeps going while you're doing your job search, having an interview, an in-person interview, or though probably what's happening now is interviews via Zoom for those who have started positions more recently. I'm sure you went through lots of rounds of interviews. What are some best practices that you've picked up that you'd like to share with our audience here?
Yeah, I've gone through lots of rounds of interviews. I think it's like maybe 10 to 12 locations every round of medical school, residency, fellowship, and job. And there's like multiple interviews there, right? So from that process of doing that, what I got really used to doing and in the habit of interviewing is really telling my story. Again, it's kind of funny because I've been listening to everyone else talk initially, and we're all saying the same thing, but in slightly different ways. And I think just bringing it back to how we even started, like Stasys kept saying, personal branding. And I think that's something that I feel, but I view it slightly differently, but just being passionate about your own story. And so when you're planning those interviews, again, medical school is a little bit different because you've been prompted, you have to write these personal statements. And so you've had to do that kind of self-reflection through journaling and putting together, a cohesive description of your personal statement of why you want to go to medical school. But I would challenge most people when they're really thinking about going into that interview to really do a lot of self-reflection and understanding of what they actually want and who they are, and not just take those questions of your strengths and weaknesses as kind of chintzy, like I have, good answers for, these are my strengths, my 3 strengths, my 3 weaknesses or whatever. But really doing a lot of soul searching to know what you want, because if you are confident in what you want and you've thought about those things and you can put them together to tell your story or your brand, as Stasys has been saying, that comes across incredibly well. And I think the way to actually apply that though is to always always take in any opportunities you're having or any other passions or excitement. And if you are speaking excitedly during an interview, if you're talking about how passionate you are about, those things on your resume, because your resume reflects, these sparks of interest here and there, and you can think about yourself and self-reflect enough about your story of yourself as a person, all of them end up fitting together. And so that would be my biggest advice, is do some really good self-reflection before you go into the interview so that you know yourself, be passionate about what you're saying, and then pull that all into a story of what you want to tell someone else, that they want to come away with knowing your story.
Yeah, and if I can just jump on what Sofia was saying and just elaborate on that, I fully agree with that about the storytelling part. The other thing from, when you're in the interview, things that I think someone should keep in mind, or quite honestly, how to prepare for the interview. The first thing I'd say is be prepared. So don't go in there not being able to tell your story about why you're excited to be there. Know about the company that you're going to interview for. Know about the role. Why are they hiring for that role? Did they not have somebody in that role previously? Why isn't that person in that role any longer? And that's where it takes a little bit of work. You need to do some phone calling before the interview. See if you can talk to other employees of the company. Again, LinkedIn is a fantastic way to meet people in different companies, and you can see who you may know that are connected to someone there and ask for an introduction. The other thing I would suggest is do mock interviews. Don't be caught off guard when you're in an interview. If that's your parents, if that's a brother or sister or a friend, do mock interviews. It feels weird the first few times you do it, but believe me, it prepares you, and you'll sort of smile when you're in the interview when that interviewer asks you a question that that your sibling or your parent asked you in the living room when you guys were practicing. And have people ask you the hard questions ahead of time so that you can practice those. Think about, is there something on your resume that isn't clear? Is there something that they're going to ask you about academically, or part of your prior work history, or anything like that? Be able to answer the tough questions. You don't have to give what you may think are perfect answers. You have to give answers that are authentic to you, because truthfully, you don't know what they're looking for. You might think they're looking for the person with the highest grades and marks, but quite honestly, most of the time, that's not the case. And so, I mean, I officially, for a job role, I don't think I've interviewed in a very long time. But quite honestly, I am in an interview every single time I go see a prospective customer. I go into someone's office and I ask them to trust me to sell their multi-million-dollar business jet, or trust me to spend $40 million of theirs to go buy an airplane. And it's probably the biggest transaction that they're going to be involved with, that they're not leading themselves because they don't know how to do it. And so I need to go in and build a level of trust with this person. It's an interview to show that I know what I'm talking about. I'm passionate about what I do and working for them, and that I'm going to do the best job. And so that doesn't end when you get the job, would be my comment. I think it's an ongoing thing that you have to be conscious of. It's my 2 cents.
I wanted to kind of build off of that, what Stasys was saying. And, you know, again, they might not be looking for the perfect answer, the right answer. You don't know the answer. Allow yourself some think time, right? You're human, right? So if they ask you a question, you're allowed to say, huh, or, you know, you're allowed to give yourself that think time and say, that's a great question. I have, you know, give me a moment to think about it, right? They're not, you know, looking for you to give them an automatic answer, because that would be actually kind of surreal, right? If you knew what they were thinking and you had an answer right away. So allow yourself, you know, to pause and even, you know, make a comment like, oh, that's a great answer. You know, give me a moment to think about that. Or if it's truly something like you don't have an answer, you give yourself permission to come back to it at the end of the interview, or, you know, rephrase it, or they can repeat the question in another way. Or, you know, if a teacher, for example, for a teaching interview, you can ask them to put it in a context. You can say, oh, could you give me an example of what that might look like in a classroom setting, or how, you know, what would that look like, you know, in a scenario with a parent or whatnot. Also, you know, this might seem like common knowledge, but it's something that, you know, when I serve on hiring committees at my school, we do look at, you know, how people are dressed, and that really does indicate how seriously they're taking the interview. And you know, some places have dress codes, and that's something that we have to, you know, at places that have a dress code, we look at that. So that's something that I wanted to add. And I just wanted to just piggyback again off of what Stasys was saying. You know, you have the ability to ask your own questions also. You do your homework, look on their website, impress them. If it's a school, look at their core values, and say, you know, I'm curious what core value number 3 means to you, because this is what it means to me. And then that, and, you know, earlier when we were talking about, you know, when Sofia was saying, you know, getting to know yourself, that is so, so crucial. Don't be afraid, you know, don't overuse the Lietuvybė card, but don't be afraid to add that in really authentically, in a way that, you know, we have leadership opportunities that we've all, you know, been exposed to, or we've you know, honed over the years. So think about that when you're doing that, you know, that soul searching, that identity work that Sofija was mentioning. Think about truly what skills have you honed through Lietuvybė? Because if you think about it, we've done so much leadership, community building, so many skills that we've kind of, I think, taken for granted. But if you think about it, other people have not built those skills that we have, and we can use that. We can use that as we interview, or as we have to write essays, or you know, cover letters, or things like that.
Yeah, it's really great to get in talking about, you know, knowing yourself, and Sofija being passionate about your subject, but also, as you were just saying, to get don't be afraid of Lietuvybė, don't be afraid of your heritage. It's a huge strength. It's something that makes us different from other people. I mean, you know, of course, Lithuanians have different names than normal American names, so there's that distinguishing factor, but also the organizations like this one, JAV LJS, of course, we have some friends from Canada, from Kanados Lithuanian-American with us as attendees. These are opportunities to take leadership positions, to think of different things to foster your interests that, you know, then maybe you can have those come out in an interview. With my current job, when I interviewed with our CEO, he looked at the very bottom of my resume. So again, you know yourself, of course, and know what's on your resume, know what's in your cover letter. Always think of things that you've had in your different experiences that you can pull out in the interview. But he looked at the very bottom and he said, so what's this Malūnas? Did I say that right? And I said, yeah, Malūnas, it's my Lithuanian folk dance group. And he said, whoa, what's that? And I said, well, I've been in this folk dance group for about 14 years. It's a really important part of my life. You know, I've been in these folk dance festivals in the United States and also in Lithuania. And he said, oh, our CFO is Polish and she's a ballroom dancer. Let's go meet her. You know, so you never know when your heritage is going to come out, when it's going to help differentiate you from other people. So Ostea, maybe let's go to you. If you've had any recent interview experiences and certain tips that you'd like to pass on.
All right. So I think one of my biggest tips is to definitely prepare beforehand. So what I usually do is I just go through a bunch of like the behavioral questions online. And then I also find 2 or 3 experiences where I know I can really fully explain the project, what I did, what challenges, what I learned, and what were my strengths and weaknesses. And then when they ask me questions, I can jump around between these different experiences. And I've had interviewers say in the past that really shows that I went the extra mile and prepared myself for it, because I didn't talk about one topic because it can get very redundant. So I think that's definitely, you should do that. And I usually keep all those notes. So then when I have my next round of interviews, I'd already have my brief points that I can repeat and talk about. And I think you should also really research about the company. So figure out what products they're selling or what services, and find like very specific questions that will really shock the interviewer, because they see that you put so much effort and you're actually interested in the company. So I think that's a really good plus. And if you know the name of the interviewer, you can look at their LinkedIn. They always like to talk about their career. So and they're more than welcome. People like to talk about themselves. So if you ask them a question, they'll definitely be on a positive note. So those are definitely my tips that have helped me a lot through these few years in college.
And I guess I'll just jump in. My background is finance, and I'm also in New York. I know I said that. So both of those topics are filled with, I would say, charlatans, if you would say. Finance is very built up with a lot of people that don't really know what they're doing, don't really have an idea what they're doing, don't really have a passion, don't really have a strength. And there's a lot of people in this business, in this environmental workplace, that tries to BS a lot of the times. So if my suggestion would be is stay authentic, stay original, focus on what you are good at, focus on what you know, and be honest at the same time. So if they ask you a question and you really don't know what you're saying, just shut up and just don't say anything. I think that there's plenty of people out there that are willing to speak out about certain things and topics that they may not have expertise in or a knowledge in. And I think the people that are actually interviewing you can smell out that BS. So stay authentic, stay original. Who are you? What are you really good at? And just go from there. I mean, obviously, if it's not a fit for you, it's not a fit for you. Stay patient and stay positive as you kind of progress through different interviews and so on and so forth.
And I can jump on that because I've been working in private finance for the last 15 years. And that is unfortunately a definite, it is something that does happen, especially in the interviews that I've conducted or ones that, you know, my boss has done. It's the same thing. Like, if it's not a role that you think you're a perfect fit for, or you really think you might not know what you're doing, do not interview for that position, because it will really not, it'll make you nervous during the interview because you won't know how to answer the questions. And it's just a couple of different things that will cause, you know, problems. So if you don't think that the job is totally right for you, or you think you might know what you're doing, it's usually probably not a good idea to interview for it. And I think just a couple things about resumes, you know, make sure your resume is up to date. Always make sure your resume is up to date. Usually tweak it, take a look at it before every interview, because you'll want it to be fresh for the person that you're interviewing with. And yes, I would have to agree, focus on your passions. My involvement in the Lithuanian community has helped me throughout my entire career, just because it is something that sets you apart from everyone else. And it always invites further questions about who you are as a person, why is it important to you, and how it helps you in your daily life, because you want to be a well-rounded individual. If you only have one thing about you, your boss or your, you know, prospective employer is going to see that and go, well, what else do they bring to the table? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're just saying about how you can stand out, certainly your passion for whatever the subject is, whatever the industry is. But Rima, you were also talking about how think about if you want to be there, because somebody who's interviewing is ultimately thinking, do I want to work with this person every day? Is this person going to fit in on this team? But you also need to think, do I want to be here too? So you can do that in many different ways by asking questions of whoever the interviewer is, ask them about their experience. As Osteo was saying, people love talking about themselves. So definitely think about that. But also think about the person who's interviewing you. What is their body language like? It's a little bit harder to do when you're on Zoom now than, you know, if you're in an in-person interview, but is the person friendly? Is the person open? Is the person, you know, did they move their chair away from you? Are they leaning in? What kind of signals are they sending? And then ultimately think about the company, organization, the school. Is this someplace where you can see yourself? So we could talk a lot more about this. We could also talk a lot more about resume building. Hopefully we'll be able to do that in other sessions. But so we've talked about the job search. We've talked about trying to figure out what career you want to get into. We've talked about when you're interviewing. But let's say that you got the job. Now what? Now what do you do? What are some things that you guys have noticed that have helped you make the most of your next opportunity, whether it's an internship, as many people have been starting internships this summer, or whether it is a full-time job? This one's for anybody jump in.
I guess I can jump in.
From my experience, I think two of the biggest things that I've learned is linear thinking and closing the thread. I think that a lot of our people in my generation is overwhelmed with social media, with media channels in general, just an overabundance of information coming from multiple different channels, right? So, and I think an inherent problem that a lot of us face is focusing on something, prioritizing that, and then actually closing it out. So there's this phrase called ABC, always be closing. Is opening something is always simple and always easy, but actually closing it and actually committing to it and finalizing it is a rarity I think I've seen constantly. So if you do get the job, I think the only way that you can really stand out is if you actually close. And if you actually close the thread and you have linear thinking. I can't tell you the amount of times that my team members go off on tangents left and right, and ultimately we lose focus on what we had initially planned. And even though we can resolve a bug or an issue on one side, we didn't accomplish what we needed to. And that ultimately comes back to bite us in the butt later because we lost focus. And I think that we have to understand that we're so much information on a daily basis. If you can kind of narrow your focus down onto one thing, whether it's a passion, whether it's a variety of different things that are ultimately going to lead up to something bigger, that will really push you through, and that will make you stand out in your workforce, in the workforce, and where you work as well.
I think also, you have the job, and especially, the first year, I mean, always, but especially the first year, you prove to that company, that school, that, the institution, why they hired you. And you prove to yourself that you deserve to be there. And so, whatever that looks like, don't give yourself any grace period to be the new person. You prove to that place that they hired you for a reason. You interviewed well for a reason. And, you sign up for committees, you join stuff, you stand out, and you work hard that first year and forever, but you work hard and you stand out, and you really show, whoever hired you that they did a good job hiring you, and they don't regret it. Because the worst thing that could happen is that committee, that individual who hired you, regrets hiring you. And that you do not want that on you, right? So, from a teacher perspective, I've seen it both ways, right? I've seen teachers who've been hired and they spend the first year, saying that they have to learn the school, and they're new and they don't know what to do, and that's great, but we're young, and you're young, and you don't need that. You don't need transition time. You've got a classroom full of kids who need you, and a school who needs the reason why they hired you. So join committees, stay late, do your part, and then prove to that school why they hired you, and keep doing it. And, join clubs, be moderators, start clubs, and infuse Lietuvybę where you can. Talk about it with your kids, ask your kids questions, who speaks different languages at home, and guarantee you'll make those connections, like whoever made that Polish connection, I think it was Jonas, because you will connect with so many students and you will stand out. Do not get the job and get lazy. That's my advice. Never get lazy, but especially the first year.
Yeah, and expanding on what Sigita said, I mean, she hit it right on the head. Is when you get the job, you have to work your butt off. I mean, in the beginning, there's no other answer. You need to eat poop for a bunch of years and pay your dues, and as you're working your butt off, learn as much as you can in those early years, because the more you progress in your career, the more other roles you're going to take on. You're going to be on hiring committees, you're going to be on other committees, and you're going to be responsible for more at your place of employment. And you're going to have less time and opportunity to learn about the science of what you're doing, about the new trends in your industry. And so the more that you can dedicate to learning in the beginning, and I say, honestly, the first 10 years of your career, that's going to set you up for later. One more small comment I would say: when you first get your job, yes, you need to work your butt off, and you need to prove to them that hiring you was a really smart decision. The other thing that, in my opinion, that you should keep in mind, you should find ways to make your boss look good. In the business world, I don't know how it applies in medicine and education. In the business world, if you can make your boss look good, that pays dividends for sure for you. So that would be one of my small comments.
So I can add, so a little bit about if you have an internship or you're just like an entry level position, I think it's really important to understand that it's a learning experience. You're gaining new skills and you're also learning more about yourself and what career path you would like to do. So what I did when I was at a new company, each week I would set up about like a 20-minute meeting with like a new individual from different divisions. So I talked to people in marketing, to sales, to engineering, to research. And through that, I really got to know the company and I networked so much. So, and I think that's really beneficial, especially as an entry-level position, because you'll learn about different career paths and maybe something else that might excite you even more. So definitely network at a company, no matter what position you are, if you just entered or in 20 years down the line.
I think part of that too, when you talk about like medical school, like once you're already, like at least the medical field, like once you're already in medical school and what do you do to succeed in that setting, and would be getting involved as much as you can in more of that, either whether that's clubs or the administrative side, whether there's different, they're always looking for people to interview, people to come into medical school, and you learn a lot more from the admin that are there, and that continues to build your network as well. And that helps you as you then have to do the next round of applications for residencies and programs there. I think that's one big thing that I would kind of jump off of that some people were saying is continuing to network while you're there, continue to help out other people around you. But the second piece kind of still that I would say, at least for me and within medicine, kind of pulls back to what I was talking about before, is for medicine, it doesn't have to be this straight path either. And I think people also, you know, this could apply to anyone not in medicine, is you can start a job and it might not be like where you're going to end up in the future. And so I think, you know, work hard at what you're doing, but if there are other opportunities coming on, you don't need to just like put your head down and only do that one thing and dive deep into that. I think when there's other opportunities that come up, anything that actually excites your passion, think about, you know, including those, incorporating those. And again, those will somehow feed into whatever story and where you want to go. For example, for medical school, I did like an extra certificate in health justice scholars. I did an extra course in mind body medicine. I studied abroad in medical school in China, looking at like acupuncture and alternative medicine. And I pulled a lot of that together into forming how I treat patients now, which I pull in a lot of like alternative therapies and different ways to treat the immune system or allergies that people might already be naturally doing. And I also, like, I kept pulling in different things that were just exciting and interesting to me. And I think ultimately make me a better physician for my patient, but also made me stand out at that next stage when I was going to interview again. And I think, again, I just really want to emphasize people view, even in medicine, it's really easy to just follow that straight path. And I think also with any job, like it's easy to just kind of turn the wheel and go in, clock in, you know, do your 9 to 5 or whatever it is. But if there are other interesting things going on, keep using that excitement or that passion that you have and keep exploring these different things. And if you end up not doing anything with them, that's fine. But I think they're in the back of your mind and they keep help building who you are and help build into your career.
It's really great. And some of what you were talking about, Sofia, and also Ostea, is finding somebody who could be sort of a mentor, I guess, or somebody, maybe a superior with whom you get along, and other people in your field who could potentially be mentors. I know personally that's been very important for me. I've had previous bosses with whom I kept in touch, and that's another thing, is to keep in touch with them if you move on someplace else. One of my first bosses wrote my recommendation for law school, and then wrote me a recommendation for the bar. And I still keep in touch with her and some of my previous bosses. But I've also unfortunately had a few circumstances where I've not had a good boss. So I wonder if anybody else has any tips for how to deal with, maybe there's a superior who in some situations, maybe you just don't have an opportunity to get to know them. That could happen this summer for those who are working remotely, who are starting internships, where they just don't get much face-to-face interaction, certainly not in person, given the circumstances these days. How do you deal with a situation where maybe you're just not getting along with that boss?
I actually had I would say a narcissist as a boss. He was he's created this world in his mind that he was this all or nothing type of guy. And ultimately, when I left the company, I started to realize that it all made sense as to the fact that he was narcissist. I think one of the cool examples that I learned is Enron in the 2000s. Kenneth Lay was one of the executives on that company. And if you can start to identify ego and start to realize that somebody's not as good as they perceive or as you perceive them as, you got to get out and get out fast. And one of the cases with Enron was in the 1997 annual report that they had, his picture, Kenneth Lay's picture, was like a small little box in the page like 20 of the annual report. And progressively over the years, his picture became bigger and bigger and bigger and started moving up to the top and the front of the annual report. And what they were writing about in this case that I was reading was, if you can start to identify where some red flags start popping up where you may not connect with him or her, or you start realizing that some things are overpromised or some things are not as they seem, I think you have to take a very calculated risk. I was actually just writing this out, is take risks. And if you got to leave, you leave. Don't think that you're pressured. Don't feel pressured to stay in that company, because ultimately it's going to hold you down and your morale is going to fall and you're not going to progress as fast as you can. So just, yeah, that would be my kind of takeaway. If you have a narcissist as a boss or somebody who's created this grandiose world of their own and you're living in it.
I don't have like an example of anything in terms of a bad boss, but in a kind of a different part of what you're asking on, which was, how do you continue to form those connections when maybe doing this virtually? And I've been focused a lot right now in my role as I'm the Associate Program Director of our Allergy Immunology Fellowship at UNC, and doing a lot of virtual learning. And so having medical students and actually undergrads who are like rotating through a clinic but through telemedicine, and so people in those same settings. And what really stands out to me on the other side of that is people who at the end of that day or at the end of those sessions follow up really quickly with an email. You know, follow up with anything that you say. If there's any questions that come up through your discussions or things, I think the biggest thing is, like, especially virtually, like, keep a little notepad and take little notes and just follow up as often as you can, whether that's at the end of every day, at the end of the week. And that continues to, whether or not it continues to build rapport or not, it continues to show you as a person who's interested in thinking about things that might be really difficult to come out when you're just, you know, on Zoom or video chatting or doing this new virtual world that we're living in. And so I just follow up.
Going back on the not getting along with a boss, I think that's also a tricky question, because I think you have to be careful how you navigate a tricky boss. I think you have to ask yourself you have to do a lot of soul searching again and ask yourself a lot of questions. And so you're not jumping to conclusions and perhaps you're not the difficult one. And so I have been at my current school for 8 years, and within a 5-year period, we had 4 different heads of school. And that's a lot of different bosses, and not all of them, as you can imagine, human nature, not all of them got along with all of the employees, but you just have to deal with it. And the answer is not always quitting, because you can't do that, right? You cannot just leave a job because there's a tricky boss. However, if there's a pattern and there's other behavior that becomes a pattern, then that's a whole other situation, right? But I think, the situation of a tricky boss, you have to kind of look inward and see if there's a way that you can reassess the situation. Is there somebody else that's a superior that you can communicate with? Is there another person that you can seek guidance? Is there human resources, that can not get involved, but that you can communicate with for whatever reason. But I feel like sometimes as humans, we get very frustrated and our first reaction is, I'm leaving, I'm not doing this. But nobody, unless it's a severe case, whatever, nobody is in a position to, I don't think anybody has a luxury that we can all just say, I'm quitting because I don't get along with somebody. So I feel like, my advice would be take a step back, look at the big picture, take a breath, make a plan, and then come back to it.
Yeah, and to expand on what Sigita said, like quitting and crying to mom is not the answer. Like it's the real world at this point, and complaining to parents and friends and hoping they'll fix the situation, it doesn't work like that anymore. And if you haven't encountered a coworker or a boss that you vehemently don't get along with, you're pretty unique in the world, because it's going to happen at some point. If it hasn't already, it's going to happen. And like Sigita said and others, you have to keep doing what you're doing and doing what you think is right. At the same time, you have to ask yourself, is it all them, or is it maybe me a little bit? And what could I do differently? But at the same time, if there's actually a big problem, you need to just work hard and keep your head down. It'll figure itself out. I mean, it might be annoying and frustrating in the meantime, and not what you want to deal with and cause the extra stress. These things tend to figure themselves out. And I mean, I've been there, I've seen it, I've experienced it, unfortunately, and they tend to just figure themselves out.
We all have had such great advice to pass on, and we've been getting some questions in the Q&A down there. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to ask them. I want to get to those in a second because we're a little bit over an hour, but let's just do a quick lightning round. And it can be on any of those subjects, on the job search, networking, on interviewing, on what to do when you're on the job. Let's go each one. I'll go first. Asking, when is this due? At least for me and for the legal field, deadlines are incredibly important. You can lose cases if you don't file during the appropriate time period. So definitely asking, when is this due? Sofia, go next. Sorry to put you on the spot.
I was distracted answering a question in the question and answer, so I totally don't even know what you're saying. Sorry.
So wait, are you asking us questions, or are we?
Yeah,
one quick tip.
Give us some advice. Lightning round.
Oh.
Piece of advice. Well, I was just answering. I was answering someone about how to decide on how did I end up doing my career path in medicine when it was not my initial degree. And so I think the biggest thing is figure out what you like, but don't be afraid. Don't quit at something. Don't quit at medicine or decide not to do medicine because you're not like the typical candidate. You're not, or don't quit doing something because you feel like you don't fit that expectation or that mold that someone else has for that path or that career path. That would be my big one lightning round thing, because that's what I was just typing. So.
All right, I'll go. Choose teaching because that's your passion. Align yourself with a school that, with whose mission you are aligned with, you like, you think is great. And then have fun with it. If you're teaching in the older grades, you have to teach tough topics, right? All the stuff that's happening in the world right now. If you're teaching in the younger grades, please start teaching what's happening in the world right now in whatever way you can. Picture books, you're allowed to talk about things that are happening in the world in a child-friendly way. And my biggest advice to teachers is answer the questions that are asked. Do not be afraid if your students ask you a tricky question and you don't know how to answer it. If it has to do with race, gender, identity, the most detrimental thing that you can do is you ignore what they're asking you because you don't know how to answer it. Just answer the question literally, and then that's it. move on. But start them young. You can do it. Make it fun. There's so much more to elementary education than numbers and letters.
One lightning round or one challenge, I would say this weekend, improve your LinkedIn profile and challenge yourself to reach out to 10 people. And don't just do the thing where like you click connect, write a sentence of why you want to connect with them, offer some value. That would be my challenge.
And I guess if I could offer, never stop learning, especially when you're in your job or the job that you get, there's always something new to learn about your field. I may have been working in finance for the last 15 years, but I'm always learning new things about how the industry changes or what specifically like the SEC changes or things like that. So remember that just because you got the job, you still don't know everything there might be about the job that you're in. So always keep learning, do your research, and make sure that you're the expert in your position.
I don't really have any kind of lightning round advice. I think if I can touch base on some of the previous things that we've discussed, it's work hard, but work smart too. I'm always a big advocate for measure twice, cut once. So don't always tackle problems head on, think creatively, think differently. And that's ultimately how you'll kind of differentiate yourself and you'll be successful. That's at least how I've lived my life, and it's worked well for me.
Ostea?
So I guess my tip would be just try not to worry. Everything will be okay in the end. I used to worry a lot that I don't know what my career path is, what I would like to do in 10 years, but in the end, not knowing is actually pretty exciting because opportunities will come surprisingly.
Awesome. So we have a few, or actually there have been a lot of questions that have been asked and many specifically of some of our panelists. So we really appreciate the engagement and certainly people who are trying to find out more about those specific fields. Let's look at one question. Let's see, the first one, which was answered by Stasys and Jonas, but it's also a global question from Lucas. How do you differentiate yourself when job searching? A recent grad from a business tech management program. So Stasys or Jonas, in case you want to maybe expand upon your answers there, or for anybody else on the panel.
Yeah, I mean, I answered expertise and passion and show that you're willing to work your butt off. I mean, it's how do you differentiate yourself? Know the role that you're going to interview for. And then when you get the role, become, as Rima said, become the expert in that role and continuously prove it.
Yeah, I wrote in my response, don't be afraid to take risks and also take calculated risks. You got to show that you're proactive. You got to show that you get out there and you're different than others. Everybody sits at home, watches YouTube, goes on Twitter, goes on Instagram, watches YouTube, whatever. If you actually get out there and you do something, you'll differentiate yourself. And it's not always comes down to whether you differentiate yourself. It's more of, are you able to get out there and take risk and push yourself outside of your boundaries? Because that's ultimately how you grow. I mean, you can stay at home all day, you can stay reserved, but I'm a big advocate for just pushing yourself as hard as you can and as much as you can.
I would also say that if you're going to differentiate yourself, confidence is key. Be confident. You are interviewing for this job for a reason. You should have that confidence within yourself to know that you have what it takes if you think you're right for that job.
So I guess one of the stories that I just want to tell really quickly before we hop off is at school, in college, they had this new venture competition where you would submit a venture or a startup or a small little business that you're trying to do. And I had this idea to do a solar venture business, nothing too promising, I had no experience in it whatsoever. I didn't know anything about solar panels. I was just kind of on the bandwagon type of thing. And going back to what I said earlier is take risk. I would literally go house to house and just knock on doors and just talk to random people and just question them. What are your perceptions of solar panels? How much would you be willing to invest in solar panels? Are you looking to save money? So I was never a solar advocate. I never have been. I don't really think I will be, but it was something that I did, and I just got out there and I learned how to talk to people. I learned how to be in front of people and stay confident, because that ultimately is what it comes down to. You got to present yourself in a proper manner.
All right, well, this has been really great. It's first off, it's great to see all of you, and thank you so much for being a part of this panel. I really hope that our attendees have gained a lot from it. Hope that we can do more of these. But I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, so really quick, in case you guys have further questions, I am dropping our JAV LJS email in the chat box. Feel free to email us with any further questions you might have, or comments or connections, and we will be happy to answer that. So I am sending that out right now. That is javljsvaldyba@gmail.com. I want to thank our panelists. You guys are excellent. Thank you so much. And all of our attendees for sticking around longer than we anticipated for this fabulous discussion. And of course, my fantastic co-host, Jonas Howes, for helping organize this whole fabulous event. Ačiū labai visiems.
Ačiū, Levaero.
Thanks, guys.
Levaero.
Thank you.